This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website.
Yeah, I felt that I should clarify that I'm not actually an archivist, because it's affected the way that I've gone about looking at these records. I've came into TNA purely as a historian, actually trying to get a handle on what the records are and trying to work out the system or the lack of a system, and then applying what I thought about the records and just trying to get a sense of just what they had kept and why. Background to the research that I was doing, this came out of a public talk where I looked at a group called the London Corresponding Society, and I was looking at all this incoming correspondence to the Home Office, which was written about this seditious group, as they were referred to. And I was really trying to work out how much of the information that the Home Secretary was getting across his desk did he take notice of, and how much of it was answered. Because the advice that we give in the reading room is that the incoming correspondence is in one series and the outgoing correspondence is in another. But if it's not indexed and it's not been catalogued, is that advice correct? But basically what I'm looking at is an analysis of the type of correspondence coming into the Home Office in the 1790s, because that's the only decade of this record series that has been fully catalogued. We're only up until about 1802, starting at 1790. Looking at the letters as they're coming in, by the amount of letters, by the subject of the letters, by where they're coming in from, seeing if there can be any patterns, seeing if there's any way that we can get a sense of if there's any way to categorise them in any way, and then also having a look at what's being sent out and seeing if there's any way to analyse the type of records that are coming in, if you're more likely to see a response if the letter is about a petition for clemency rather than about providing some intelligence about the French invasion, and seeing if we can apply those kind of rules to the advice that we give out in the reading room. But also, if the correspondence isn't where it should be, is it in another record series in the Home Office, in one of the other record series? So the Home Office is the department that we're looking at, formed in 1782 out of this State Papers Southern Department. It moved to a building on Whitehall called Montague Lodgings, occupying the first floor. And the Home Office took 4 rooms on the first floor of this building. The first was the office of the Home Secretary. The two permanent undersecretaries had their own office, and the remaining rooms occupied by a dozen clerks. Up until this point, State Papers Domestic is in record series SP37, that stands for State Papers 37, which is nicely calendared. You can usually find what you want fairly easily. But for some reason, when they formed the Home Office, they decided to abandon this system of calendaring and simply have an incoming and an outgoing as a series of records. Now, I was trying to work out whether the absence of a system was a system in itself, in that these dozen clerks, because they're working together on a daily basis, because they would know what was going on, was that enough for them? If they could find, if the Home Secretary turned around to them and said, "Can you find me this letter of last week from Grenville, the Foreign Secretary," they would be able to find it. They weren't thinking about us in the future as researchers. And also, just to introduce the two Home Secretaries in the 1790s. The first is Henry Dundas, who was Home Secretary from 1791 to 1794. He was succeeded by William Cavendish Bentinck, the Duke of Portland, who was Home Secretary then from July 1794 till July of 1801. I just think it's important to note who was in charge of the Home Department, as it was called, because they both had contrasting styles. William Cavendish Bentinck, the Duke of Portland, he was firmly opposed to the French Revolution and the subsequent war. He was very suspicious of France, and that really colours the direction that the Home Office takes when he comes into office. Dundas, you get lots of correspondence about patronage and jobs, and he seemed to have a big network of friends and connections, but Bentinck was very much interested in intelligence, and you can see that in the type of correspondence that's coming in and going out, but we'll come back to that. In terms of incoming series, the main record series for letters coming in from all around the country to the Home Office is in record series HO42. It starts in 1782 when the Home Office is founded, and it goes up until 1820, which is the date of death of George IV. It then carries George III, sorry, not George IV. The record series that carries on from 1820 is HO52, which is called the Counties Correspondence. It's just interesting that everything preceding that was lumped chronologically, whereas the HO52, the Counties Correspondence, at least they try and make an effort of grouping things by county and then by year. Still not indexed though. After 1800, the Home Office is starting to take on more responsibilities. They've got the Alien Office, they're taking in crop surveys, they're starting to keep a hold of population counts, and because their remit is becoming more diverse, they start to diversify their correspondence. So they start with the Criminal Department, for example, the Alien Office, like I just mentioned, and they start off their own dedicated record series about criminal matters, which is HO40, the Disturbances Correspondence, and that starts in 1812 and goes up through past the point where they start registering correspondence again. The elephant in the room is the record series HO44, which is a record series of uncertain provenance, which always makes me a little nervous. It's a record series that goes from 1773, before the Home Office was even started, all the way through past when they start registering the correspondence again, up until 1861. It's not a massive record series, but it influences the kind of statistics, and the if you're looking at the correspondence of a particular year, you have to take it into account. Nobody's really sure about where it's come from. It just seems as if the Home Office has found these whole boxes of letters in the back of a cupboard and brought them to the Public Record Office in 1861 and said, "Here, we found all these." And it looks as if that they were just never accounted for at the time. And this talk that I mentioned, I started off by saying that I'm looking at records that aren't indexed. So we're going from 1782 to 1839. The Home Office decided that they were going to start a registry system in 1847, and that they were going to backdate their registry to 1839. Some people have been said to argue that those years, because those first years, 1839 to 47, because they're backdated, they're not particularly reliable. But at least it was an effort to make some kind of registry, and it's better than just having unindexed boxes chocked to the brim of correspondence. Now there are these four incoming series, and it's quite frustrating that three of them overlap. Like, for example, if you had a letter written about a disturbance, if you take like the Luddites, for example, about 1816 or 1817, there had been a spate of machine breaking in Leeds, for example, and you sent in a letter from the Mayor of Leeds to the Home Secretary, it could go into HO42, which is the main incoming correspondence series. It could be put into HO40 because it's relating to a disturbance, or it could be left in HO44 and had hitherto been forgotten about. So it could be in any three record series. If you're looking for a response, you'll see on this next slide that the same period of time that there are only 4 incoming record series for incoming correspondence. There are at least 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 outgoing series. So you can look in the general series of outgoing letters, which is HO43, which goes together with HO42, or you would have to look by subject if you knew it was relating to something particular. HO5 for aliens office correspondence, HO13 for criminals, for example. Quite often, just to confuse matters, there's copies in both, and sometimes copies in neither. So I started off simply by looking at the amount of letters that were coming into the Home Office, because that is the first kind of trend. 1792, you've got 1,082 incoming letters. 1795, there are 733, and 1798, there are 577, I believe. Putting together HO44 as well, 1792 there are 33 letters, 1795 25, and 1798 18. So there is this general downwards trend of more letters coming in for 1792 and tailing off towards the end of the 18th century. What I decided to do was I was going to have a look at this correspondence and put it into categories, because I thought it was important to see what types of letters were coming in, and then if I compared that to the outgoing, see what type of letters were being answered, so that we could try and put that advice into effect when we got up into the reading rooms and we're dealing with people by email and phone, etc. So I split it up into 6 categories: about correspondence relating to criminals, correspondence relating to intelligence from around the country, because the Home Office was such a small body of men, 15 men manning the Home Office for the entire country throughout the 1790s, that this was the only conduit, or the main conduit, for the people around the country to send in letters to tell the Home Secretary exactly what was happening around the country. People asking for jobs, petitions for clemency, addresses of loyalty, and then what I've termed entreaties. This is basically people asking for something from the government, either asking for advice, asking for charity, asking for some sort of help otherwise between jobs or anything like that, like a position, and also answering specific requests for information that couldn't really be termed intelligence. There's quite a lot of correspondence in 1792, for example. They ask how much it costs to produce the London Gazette and how many editions they sell, and there's a whole series of back and forth, which is a request for information, but you couldn't really term it intelligence. So for 1792, you see here that with 431 letters out of the 1,082, people sending in intelligence reports around the country is the largest category. By looking at these categories as well, I hope to see if I could pinpoint specific trends in each year that could be dismissed as an anomaly. With criminals, there are 136 letters relating to criminals going into the Home Office. I thought this was fairly standard until I started looking at the other years, but it turns out that in HO43, the outgoing letters, there's a note from the Home Secretary Dundas asking how many criminals each town has in their jail who are awaiting transportation before the second fleet is being sent to New South Wales. So there's reports coming in from all town jails saying how many criminals they've got waiting to go, because that's just a one-off event. You don't see that repeated later on. Same with jobs. There are 157 letters relating to people asking for jobs, but that's when the Middlesex Justices Act comes out, where they're recruiting 21 new magistrates for the City of London, the City of London as a whole, I shouldn't say the City of London. And they're getting letters from people wanting jobs, people who are patrons who are getting jobs for their favourites. And then petitions of loyalty. Because of these seditious societies in 1792, you get 59 addresses of loyalty coming in from around the country, professing their love for the king and their hatred of all things French. What I decided to do as well is to look at the letters by location. Obviously, you're expecting the bigger counties to write in more letters. So what I did was to take the letters, the amount of letters sent in from each county, and divide that by the population of the county to get a sort of per capita figure, which I thought would be more illustrative. Obviously, you're not expecting a small county like Rutland to send in more letters than the North Riding of Yorkshire, for example. Just plotting this on a map, you can see that from the top sort of, I mean, I've got 15 counties here. The people who write the most letters, Kent, Hampshire, Middlesex, Sussex and Surrey, are all within the top 7 counties. And that's a theme. If we look at this map, this kind of replicates itself throughout the whole of the 19th century and beyond when you're talking about dealings with government. In that the closer you are to London, the more that you can expect an interaction with government, obviously because the distance is closer. If you're writing from Carlisle, it's obviously going to take a lot longer for you to get a response than it is if you're writing just from Guildford, say. So what you tend to find is magistrates, Lord Lieutenants, Lord Mayors in the northern counties dealing with local issues themselves and kind of telling the Home Secretary what they've done in a kind of "I hope this is alright" sort of fashion. But by plotting those per capita numbers on a map, you can see that the darker colours, the more dense, the more densely coloured counties are the ones who are writing more letters into government, and they're all mainly around the southeast. There are a few, again, anomalies. Warwickshire, for example, sends in lots of correspondence in 1792 from one very zealous Lord Mayor who likes to keep the Home Secretary informed. I'm not sure how pleased the Home Secretary was about this, but this one man, whose name was Brooks, sends in lots of letters. Again, Northumberland and Durham, they're quite dark in colour, which indicates quite a few letters being sent in. That was relating to a 1-week strike by dockyard workers, and they were asking whether they should send in troops, and there were letters being sent between the Mayor, the Lord Lieutenant and local army commanders about quite what they should do. Again, it's a one-off event. I thought it would be best to take these figures and try and compare them to 1795 and 1798 to see if anything really has stuck out as to if there was some consistency or just anomalies that you could then dismiss. If you look at the graph, obviously the first column is quite small on here. The first column is 1792, then 1795 and 1798. The first few counties, Kent, Hampshire and Middlesex, those numbers are quite small, they're quite consistent, so it's quite a high density of letters being sent in. Warwickshire, like I say, it starts off with a lot of letters being sent in, but then once this zealous Lord Mayor leaves power, 1798, they're sending in virtually nothing. It's interesting to see trends going the opposite direction, in that you get more letters being sent in later on. For example, Lancashire and Cheshire, 1792, they're sending in fewer letters than they are 1795, 1798. Again, you can attribute it to factors at the time, in that 1798 there's more disturbances relating to more seditious societies, and also Irish immigrants coming into through Liverpool, who they're worried about because they're worried that they're in league with the French, who are plotting an invasion, an imminent invasion. just going back to the map shortly, it is just interesting to see that kind of density around the southeast, and I just wondered whether that would influence what we would see in the outgoing letters as well, because, like I said, if there was a disturbance in Carlisle and you send a letter to the Home Secretary and you're waiting on an instruction, the disturbance is more than likely going to be over. So I just wonder whether the Home Secretary or the clerks, the Under-Secretaries, would also have that view, in that they're not expecting to be asked for advice, they're expecting to be told what's going on around the country, and then just send a letter thanking people for their efforts afterwards. But if the disturbance is only going on a few miles away, they could probably send a letter back, if not the same day, but the next day. And also, just looking at the theme, like the types of letters that are coming in each year, just to see if there was any change as well. The numbers you can't really visualise these kind of numbers because the amount of letters are so different. So there's barely half the amount of letters coming into the Home Office in 1798 than there are in 1792. So you have to take these figures with a pinch of salt. Obviously there are some that you can discount, like I mentioned, the jobs with the Middlesex Justices Act. There are only 19 letters out of 733 in 1795 asking for jobs, which then picks up again to 64 out of the 577 in 1798, because there are people being recommended for posts as deputy lieutenants of particular counties. Same with the proclamations of loyalty. There are quite a few in 1792 because of these seditious societies like the London Corresponding Society, and also in 1795 because there was a plot on the life of the king which was foiled, and there was lots of proclamations of loyalty saying how well he avoided the assassination attempt. Also the pardons as well is quite interesting. I mentioned Dundas was a more kind of convivial type of person, and he had a larger connection of contacts, whereas when Portland came in, see the numbers fall away from 51 to 21 to 12 because he was more hard-nosed, and they thought that it was less likely to win him over if they sent a petition for clemency in, where Dundas was more worth a shot. But like I said, the numbers don't really mean a great deal, so I turned them into a sort of percentage figure to see if there was any kind of consistency. Matters relating to intelligence is always the top. You've got about 40% of the letters coming in 1792 relating to intelligence matters, nearly 2/3 in 1795, when it's intelligence. It doesn't necessarily just mean about a French invasion, about seditious societies. It's getting a picture of what's happening throughout the country. The Home Office was convinced that the French were going to blockade the ports and that Britain was going to starve, so they sent out requests in 1795 to work out the crop situation throughout the country, and you get crop returns from all around the UK in 1795, hundreds and hundreds of letters, and it actually fills almost 2/3. As I said, the vast majority of HO 42 in 1795 is these crop returns. So that's what's come in. Now I'm going to look at what's going out. So the outgoing record series is HO 43. I'm going to have a look at that for 1792, 1795 and 1798. Again, see the totals, just see if I can pick up any trends, and then see how much there is in correlation between the two incoming and outgoing series. 1792 and 1798, I've looked at those two in particular because 1798 has an internal index in HO 43, which is quite useful. 1792, for the outgoing series, I listed myself, and 1795 only has a partial index. So although I've got vague running totals for 1795, I haven't actually had enough of a chance to go through properly and analyse the data one for one. So 1792, 1,082 incoming letters. Total matches to HO42 is 50. That's 4.62% of the incoming letters seem to receive an answer.
I'm just wondering whether you were looking only at replies and omitting letters which were going out which weren't actually replies to anything.
I was specifically looking for an answer to an incoming letter. I did take into account the prison returns. That's one letter, one outgoing letter that's generated a couple 150 odd responses. But I just wanted to see for all the rest of the incoming, if any of them have got a response. I said the majority of them were either the intelligence reports or people asking for something like charity or a petition for clemency. So most of it is kind of an unsolicited letter. There's very few that are actually answering a direct response for information from the Home Secretary. I thought it was probably safe enough to take it as a total. At 1798, you're looking at 10.75% of the letters. That's 62 of the 577 that seem to have a direct response from the Home Secretary. Again, I've just tried to categorise the types of letters that were responded to. And intelligence, again, is the top, the most that's coming in, so you can expect that to be the most that's going out. 28 of the 50 responses from 1792 are about intelligence. Tellingly, they are asking for further reports. So they're saying, thank you very much for letting us know what's going on in Bolton. If this happens again, if this carries on, please let us know. These entreaties, these asking for something from the government, usually they're to do with getting some sort of charity, either entry to a charitable institution that they're hoping for patronage from the Home Secretary. That's what these responses tend to be. And then you get the odd response about thanking it for a petition, an address of loyalty, or answering a request for a job. In 1798, the trend is still there. The most amount of responses, 54.8% of the responses in 1798 are relating to intelligence reports that they've then answered and asked for more information. Then it's the entreaties category again, with 14 responses of the 62, followed by other small bits and bobs later on. Just graphically again, you can see that there's just this trend of the intelligence reports being the most popularly answered letter, followed by the direct requests from the Home Secretary, and then the petitions of loyalty. But the job situation, because there are more letters coming in about jobs in 1792 because of this Middlesex Justices Act, you can appreciate that there will be a need for more responses. They are actually pretty much all negative responses that have been sent out. Sorry, we couldn't offer your particular choice of role. But then, when you take into account, when I actually looked at HO43, the advice that we usually give, as I mentioned at the beginning, is that the incoming is in HO42 and the outgoing is in HO43, and that's kind of how it is. But when I actually looked at HO43 and looked at the amount of letters that were going out from these record series, I begin to think maybe we had a slightly different problem to the one that we first assumed. I mentioned 1792 in the incoming record series. There are 1,082 incoming letters. In the outgoing series, there are only 299. So when I looked at that first of all, I thought fair enough, fewer letters being answered than there are coming in. Looking at 1795, there are 733 incoming letters, but there are 1,095 outgoing. Similarly with 1798, there are 577 incoming letters, 585 outgoing. So for those 2 years, there are more letters going out than there are coming in, which I thought was quite a different problem to the one that I first thought that I'd encounter, and one that would probably need a bit of explaining. In that it's not, maybe we don't need to look for where the outgoing letters are, but maybe where the incoming letters are filed as well. In these partial indexes, as I mentioned at the back, you can have a look at the different departments. The indexes are split up by the different department that the letters are being sent out to. The Board of Ordnance, the Foreign Office, the Privy Council, the militia regiments, local magistrates, the War Office, and then miscellaneous, which is a problem in itself. And you can see the amount of letters that are being sent out to these different departments. 37 letters going out to the Board of Ordnance, 24 being sent to the Foreign Office, 87 to the Privy Council, 157 to the militia regiments. It's finding where these incoming letters are and trying to marry those up as well. Several government departments have their own record series for incoming correspondence, but no outgoing correspondence series. So a letter that's being sent from the Privy Council to the Home Office, you should expect to find the incoming letter in HO 31, which is a dedicated record series to Privy Council Office correspondence. But they don't have an entry book, an outgoing series for that correspondence. So although they got their own dedicated incoming, the outgoing should be in HO 43. Similarly with the Foreign Office, their incoming correspondence is in HO 32, the outgoing should be in HO 43. With the Post Office, the incoming is HO 33, the outgoing again should be in HO 43. That doesn't always marry up. Sometimes incoming letters from the Foreign Office are in with the general incoming series. Again, that may not have been a problem for the dozen or so clerks that were working at the Home Office. They may have just thought, right, well, I know where that is, so that's fine. If they're taking the letter out of one correspondence series and another one of the clerks is using it later on in the day, they might have put it in another series temporarily. It may have been a new starter that hadn't got a grip to the system. Really don't know. But it just means that you can't rely on the one record series. If you're looking for a note from the Post Office to the Home Office, you can't just rely on HO 33. You have to go back to HO 42 as well. Just to illustrate that point, if you just do a basic catalogue search on Discovery, our wonderful new catalogue, and put in the name Francis Freeling, who was actually one of the longest serving civil servants of this period. He was in the General Post Office for about 50 years. If you type in his name or General Post Office into HO 42, you get about 30 or 40 different results. These are just a few examples that I picked off at random. You can't just rely on the records being in HO 33, as I said. You have to look in HO 42 as well, and HO 44. It could be in either one of the three. Some of the government departments do have their own entry book. The Admiralty Correspondence, for example, they have their own incoming series, so from the Admiralty to the Home Office, that's HO 28. They also have a dedicated entry book, which is HO 29. Again, would you expect all the incoming correspondence and the outgoing correspondence to be in that record series. Similarly for the Treasury, HO35 is the incoming from the Treasury, HO36 is the outgoing. And records relating to the militia, HO50 is the incoming, HO51 are the outgoing. But just if we go back to those partial indexes from HO43, you see in 1795 there are 157 letters being sent out to the militia corps, and then in HO43 for 1798 there are 91 letters being sent out to militia regiments. So even though they've got their own entry book dedicated just to the militia in HO51, you have to look in HO43 as well. Just in one of the volumes at random, 38 letters for the year in 1798. HO51 has 471 letters for that year in record HO51-59, but that's 38 letters in HO43. That's 7.5% of the total. It's not an insignificant number. It's too many just to be a mistake. And you have to wonder exactly how that came to pass. If a letter needed answering and one of the other clerks was using the militia entry book, did they just put it into the book, into HO43, the general entry book, because it's recorded somewhere? I thought maybe that these were duplicates, so I looked at HO43 and HO51 together, and they're not. They are separate letters. It just compounds the misery.
I wonder, is there anything about the kind of levels of approval letters going out which might cause things to be entered separately?
Such as maybe they needed for the Home Secretary to come back rather than just one of the Under Secretaries to... It's possible. The three names, the two Under Secretaries and the Secretary of State, you see all three of their names in the entry books. And then you get John King, who is one of the Under Secretaries for Dundas. You get him writing on behalf of the Secretary of State, and then you get Dundas writing his own letters. So
there's an administrative process underlying apparent discrepancies.
It is possible. But all these incoming and outgoing record series, it does mean that you have to do a bit of chasing around. I've just got an example here. There's a letter that's coming from Falmouth describing a wrecked Dutch frigate and the conduct of the local residents who seem to be ransacking and looting the frigate. So there's a letter that comes in HO42, and you have to look in HO43 to see if there's a response. So there's a letter written to Lord Grenville's Foreign Secretary from Dundas, the Home Secretary, forwarding notice about what's going on, but also he intimates that he'd requested information from Sir Richard Bickerton, the Admiral stationed in Cornwall, asking for more information, asking him to interview the locals and find out exactly what had been going on. So then, do you look in the Admiralty entry books looking for a letter being sent from the Home Office to the Admiralty to see if he sent a letter to the Admiralty who then forwarded it to the Admiral? Or do you look in HO43 again later on looking for a letter sent directly from Dundas to Bickerton? Turns out that there is a letter in there going out, but you don't find a letter coming back in from Bickerton. So maybe that's just got lost along the way. I don't know. I haven't been able to find Bickerton's response. But then that means that you have to look in another two record series HO 28.8, so letters from the Lords of the Admiralty, and HO 28.61, which is Admiralty Correspondence Supplementary, to try and find this response, as well as looking in HO 44, as well as looking in HO 42. I don't find anything, but I know that he's written to Grenville, so then I look in the Foreign Office correspondence. Is there a letter from the Foreign Office back? Again, I couldn't find one, but you also then have to look at HO 44 and HO 42. So really, that's where I'm at, and it's a decision that has to be made about the best way to move things forward. We are cataloguing HO 42. As I said, it's a very slow process. We've done from 1790 to about 1802 we're working on at the moment. But then it would mean looking at all the letters that were incoming, and then do we go through all the entry books at the same time to see if we can match up? Should we be matching them up, or should we just be revising our advice that we give out to readers, saying that in all likelihood, looking at the response rates that I've been discovering, we say that in all likelihood a response isn't in our records? Do we tell them to go to the county record office that was responsible if they were writing a letter to the Lord Mayor at Leeds about a disturbance? So we say a response is more likely to be with his personal papers in West Yorkshire Archive Service, for example. It's something that's going to take us a long time, and I really wish that they'd have just stuck with their calendaring system, because 60 years is a lot of correspondence to try and get your head around and try and link together.